I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, pouring my heart out to a bunch of strangers online. My name is Jake, and I was married to a woman named Lisa for 6 years. We seemed like the perfect couple. Friends told us we were the envy of everyone we knew. Lisa was beautiful, smart, and ambitious. I thought we had it all. But as it turns out, nothing is as it seems. It started with the little things. Lisa had always been a bit of a social butterfly, but lately she had been more secretive. I'd find her on her phone, giggling at texts when I walked into the room, but she'd quickly shove it into her pocket. When I asked who she was texting, she'd wave it off, saying it was just a work colleague or a group chat. I brushed it off as nothing because I wanted to trust her. Then there were the late nights. Lisa used to love our quiet evenings together, but suddenly she was working late more often. At first, I figured she was just being ambitious at her job at the marketing firm. But when she started coming home smelling like cheap cologne, something in my gut twisted. I tried asking her about it, only to be met with her classic eye roll and some excuse about a client meeting. I wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling kept growing. The real turning point came one random Saturday afternoon. I had decided to surprise her with a nice dinner. I went to the kitchen to prep some ingredients, and while rummaging through the cabinets, I stumbled upon a receipt tucked under some paperwork. It was for a local hotel. My heart dropped when I saw the date, just a week prior. It wasn't for a business meeting, it was for a room. The shock hit me like a train. I felt my breath quicken as I stood there, staring at the receipt. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but all the pieces started falling into place. I confronted her that evening after she returned home, and honestly, I wish I'd prepared for the worst. When I asked her about the hotel receipt, her eyes darted away from mine, and I watched as her facade crumbled. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, almost laughing nervously as if that made it better. "I was planning a surprise getaway for us. You know how stressful work has been." But I wasn't buying it. Everything about her demeanor screamed guilt. I pressed harder, and that's when she finally admitted it. She had been cheating on me with our wedding caterer, a guy named Mike who was apparently charming enough to sweep her off her feet. As she spilled the details, it was as if she was narrating a soap opera. The excuses and lies flowed so easily from her lips that it was almost impressive. In that moment, I felt a swirl of emotions. Anger surged through me. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my loyalty, and she threw it all away for some fling with a dude who served our wedding cake. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I just felt hollow. As the confrontation progressed, her attitude shifted from defensive to almost flippant. "It was just sex, Jake. You know how it is," she said dismissively, as if that made it any better. I stood there in disbelief, unable to comprehend how someone I loved could reduce our entire relationship to just sex. I think that was the moment the pain turned from shock to deep sorrow. I felt like my whole world was crumbling. I had built a life with her based on trust and love, and she shattered it in a few careless minutes. I walked away, feeling numb, while she continued to justify her actions. The next few days were a blur. I vacillated between rage and sadness, replaying every moment we had shared, every laugh, every fight, wondering where it all went wrong. I felt a desperate urge to take control of my life again, to regain the power she had stripped away. But what was I going to do? I had to think long and hard about my next steps. After that confrontation, my mind was racing with thoughts of betrayal and revenge. I didn't want to be the guy who wallowed in self-pity, but I also didn't want to act impulsively. I needed a plan. I refused to let Lisa walk away from this unscathed. She had turned our life together into a joke, and I wasn't going to be the punchline. The first order of business was to gather my thoughts and figure out what I wanted. I spent a lot of time going over the past and what our relationship had meant to me. I thought about the dreams we had shared, the plans for a future that now felt utterly shattered. I realized that I didn't want to work it out. Rebuilding something that had already been broken seemed pointless. I needed to take a stand for myself, and that meant putting an end to the high-class lifestyle she had come to enjoy. I decided to start with the finances. Lisa had always been the one to manage our money, and I had trusted her completely. But now that I was on my own, I realized I needed to dig deeper into our accounts. I wanted to know where every dollar had gone. As I pored over the bank statements, I discovered she had been spending a lot of money on dinners, shopping, and weekend getaways, most of which I hadn't been privy to. I felt the fire of indignation burning hotter. Then I came across something that made my blood boil, a transfer to her phone bill that was suspiciously high. I dug deeper and found out she had been texting Mike frequently, often late at night when I was asleep. This infuriated me. I felt like a fool for not noticing sooner. The truth was, she had been living a double life, and now it was my turn to turn the tables. I devised a plan to dig into her day-to-day life. I started following her, nothing too extreme, just enough to see what she was up to when she thought I wasn't around. I wanted to catch her in the act of something that would leave no room for denial. The more I followed her, the clearer it became that she hadn't changed one bit. She was still seeing Mike. As I watched them from a distance, I couldn't help but feel a sickening mix of anger and sadness. I wanted to catch them together, to confront her with the evidence, but something held me back each time. Maybe it was the part of me that hoped she could somehow realize her mistakes and come back to me, but the other part, the vengeful part, wanted her to feel the weight of her choices. It wasn't long before I found my opportunity. I learned that they were meeting for lunch at that same hotel where she had booked a room. I decided to show up, not to confront her right away but to get proof. I parked my car across the street and watched as she walked in, all smiles and laughter, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I snapped photos from a distance, shaking with a mix of anticipation and rage. Seeing them together only solidified my resolve. I knew I had to act, and I needed to make a statement that this would not go unpunished. I envisioned a grand scheme that would unravel her carefully constructed facade. I wanted Lisa to understand the consequences of her choices and to feel the impact of losing everything she took for granted. The wheels in my mind began to turn. I thought about her love for the finer things in life, the lavish dinners, the designer clothes, and the exclusive events. It was all about appearances for her, and I knew she wouldn't know how to cope without that luxurious lifestyle. I would take everything away from her, but I'd do it in a way that left her with a sense of confusion and regret. My plan began to take shape. I would use the information I gathered about her spending habits and her affair to my advantage. I started by canceling our joint accounts. I knew that hitting her financially would hit her hard, especially since she had relied on my income to maintain her lifestyle. I also reached out to a lawyer to understand what my options were regarding separating our finances and property. I wouldn't let her take me for a ride any longer. When I finally presented my plans to my lawyer, I felt a sense of power. I was no longer the victim, I was the one in control. I had my sights set on the future, and it was going to be a future without Lisa dragging me down. My heart was heavy, but I felt a newfound strength rising within me. I had been blindsided, but I wasn't going to let it destroy me. I had a long road ahead, but at least I knew I was on the right path. As I prepared myself for the next steps, I realized I wasn't just fighting for revenge. I was fighting for my own dignity and future happiness. The game was just beginning, and I was ready to play. The days following my decision felt like a whirlwind. I was filled with a mix of adrenaline and anxiety. The initial rush of planning my revenge was exhilarating, but it was quickly tempered by the weight of what I was about to do. I had spent so much time contemplating the betrayal that now I was faced with executing my plan. I started with the finances. I had already canceled our joint accounts, and I made sure to minimize our shared expenses as much as possible. Lisa had become so accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle, dinners out, shopping sprees, and spa days, while I had been the steady provider. I knew this would hit her like a brick wall when she realized her accounts had dried up. The next step was to gather more evidence against her. I had already taken photos of her with Mike at the hotel, but I wanted to ensure I had enough documentation to make her feel the weight of her actions. I followed her a few more times, capturing moments where she was being too cozy with him. I felt like a private investigator, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt justified. I was uncovering the truth, and soon, she would have no choice but to face the consequences. Then came the day I had been waiting for. I had set up a meeting with my lawyer to discuss the specifics of our divorce. I strolled into the office, feeling a mixture of determination and resolve. We went over the details of what my rights were regarding our assets and how I could potentially gain leverage in the negotiations. I was advised to keep meticulous records of everything: Lisa's spending habits, her affair, and how it had affected me emotionally and financially. The more evidence I could provide, the stronger my case. As I prepared for the divorce proceedings, I also began to think about how to confront Lisa without giving away my hand too early. I wanted to make it dramatic, a moment she wouldn't forget. I envisioned a scenario where I would reveal to her that I knew everything: her affair, her lies, and how she had deceived me. My heart raced just thinking about it. One evening, I called Lisa and asked if we could sit down and talk. She agreed, probably thinking it was just another harmless discussion about our relationship. Little did she know that I was about to turn her world upside down. I set the stage at our usual spot, the cozy dining room where we had shared countless meals, laughter, and even a few tears. I made it feel normal so she wouldn't suspect a thing. When she arrived, she wore that same bright smile that had once made my heart flutter. I hated how she could still dazzle, even after everything she'd done. We chit-chatted about mundane topics, but I could feel the tension mounting inside me. I decided to take a deep breath and dive into the conversation. "Lisa, I've been thinking about our marriage and the recent changes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know things have been off, and I wanted to understand where we stand." She nodded, her expression turning serious. "I agree, Jake. Things have felt different, but I think we can work through it. I love you and I want to make things right." Her words grated on my nerves. I wanted to laugh at her audacity, but I maintained my composure. Love, love is built on trust, Lisa, and trust is something you shattered a long time ago. The color drained from her face, and I knew I had her attention. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I leaned in, my heart racing as I pulled out my phone. "Let's talk about trust and honesty. You've been busy, haven't you?" I swiped through the photos I had taken, the very images that would expose her. "I saw you with Mike at the hotel. You may think I'm blind, but I've been watching. I know everything." Her reaction was immediate, defensive, and desperate. "Jake, you don't understand. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was just feeling lost, and Mike was there for me." I watched as the tears sprang to her eyes, but they felt empty compared to the anguish I had endured. "Lost? So you decided to lose yourself in someone else's bed?" "No, Lisa, this was a choice. Your choice." Every word felt like a validation of my pain, and I reveled in the moment. She tried to explain, to rationalize her actions, but nothing she said could erase the betrayal. It was clear that my words hit hard, and I knew I had her right where I wanted her. Then came the bombshell. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I said, cutting her off, "and I'm filing for divorce. I've canceled our accounts, and I won't be supporting your lavish lifestyle any longer." Her reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You can't do this to me. I deserve better. You're ruining my life." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You ruined your life the moment you decided to cheat. This is just the consequence of your actions." The confrontation reached a fever pitch as she pleaded, but I remained resolute. I watched her scramble for excuses, her initial confidence deflating like a balloon. My heart was pounding, but it was no longer from anger. It was from the exhilaration of taking control. I ended the evening with finality. "You'll have to deal with the consequences, Lisa. I won't be supporting you anymore. You wanted freedom. You've got it. But it's not going to be the freedom you envisioned." As she left, the air felt charged. I knew I had made a monumental decision that would change both our lives forever. I was finally taking a stand, and with every step she took away from me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The plan was in motion, and I was ready to see it through. The aftermath of that conversation would ripple through both our lives. I had unleashed a storm, and it was only just beginning. I felt empowered, knowing that I was no longer a victim of her betrayal. I was reclaiming my life, and I had no intention of looking back. The days after the confrontation with Lisa felt surreal. I was riding the high of finally confronting her, but reality soon set in. The divorce papers were filed, and I knew things were about to get ugly. But honestly, I was prepared for whatever storm was coming my way. I had spent too long being blindsided by her lies, and now I felt fortified and ready to stand my ground. I moved forward with my plan, determined to make her experience the consequences of her choices. I had already started the process of separating our finances, and it was time to address the emotional fallout of our situation. I knew the next step would be to break it to our family and friends. I didn't want to play the victim, but I felt it was important to set the record straight before any rumors started flying. I reached out to a few close friends first, people I trusted. I explained what had happened, how Lisa had betrayed me, and how I was now pursuing a divorce. The reactions were mixed. Some were shocked, while others voiced suspicions they had harbored about Lisa for a while. It was comforting to have their support, but I also felt an undercurrent of concern. They all seemed to wonder if I was making the right choice. In their eyes, I was the one who had lost everything, but I refused to look at it that way. I had spent enough time feeling like a victim, and I was done with that mindset. I reminded myself of the empowerment I had felt when I stood up to Lisa. This was my chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Soon after, I broke the news to my family. I invited my parents over for dinner, a casual setting, hoping to keep the mood light while I dropped the bombshell. As we ate, I could feel the tension building. My parents were always supportive, but I could sense their concern for my well-being, especially when I started talking about my relationship with Lisa. When I finally laid it all out on the table, the affair, the betrayal, the divorce, my mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jake, I can't believe it. Are you okay?" I assured her I was fine, even though I could feel the lump in my throat. I had rehearsed this moment, but saying it aloud made it all too real. My father, usually the stoic type, was visibly upset. "Son, I'm sorry you have to go through this. You deserve better." Their support was heartwarming, but it also made me reflect on what I had lost. I realized that my life as I knew it was over, but I had the chance to rebuild. I didn't want to dwell on the past or use it as an anchor. I had to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had cut ties with Lisa financially, and I was slowly peeling away from the emotional weight she had placed on my shoulders. I threw myself into work, focusing on my job and spending time with friends who lifted my spirits. I even started to explore new hobbies, something I had neglected while trying to keep our relationship afloat. But Lisa, of course, didn't take my decision lying down. She began to reach out, trying to negotiate, to plead for another chance. I received texts filled with apologies, tears, and promises that she'd change. But every time I read them, I was reminded of how she had shattered my trust. I had learned the hard way that her words meant very little. One evening, after a particularly tough day at work, I received a call from her. "Jake, please, can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaky. I hesitated. I didn't want to give her another chance to manipulate the situation, but I also didn't want to appear completely heartless. "What do you want to talk about?" I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I just want to understand. I want to make things right," she said, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I realize how much I've hurt you. I was stupid and I regret it." "Lisa, it's too late for that. You made your choices. You can't just take them back because you're feeling guilty now," I responded, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to explain myself," she pushed. "I never meant for it to happen. It was a moment of weakness." I scoffed, shaking my head. "A moment of weakness, that's your excuse. You didn't just trip and fall into bed with someone. You actively chose to betray me. That's not a mistake you can brush off." The conversation spiraled as she tried to shift the blame, bringing up my supposed shortcomings in the marriage. I recognized the bait and I wasn't going to take it. "This is not about me, Lisa. You made a conscious decision to cheat. You have to own that." She fell silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. "I'll do anything you want to fix this, Jake. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. Just please give me another chance." I felt a mix of anger and pity wash over me. "No, Lisa, this isn't just about fixing things. It's about respect and trust, and you've destroyed both. I'm done negotiating. I want a divorce, and that's final." The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of my decision settled heavily in the air. I had said what I needed to say, and she had heard me loud and clear. I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. I knew there was no turning back now. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on everything that had happened. I felt stronger than I had in months, but I also felt the pang of loss. I had loved her deeply, and it hurt to see how far we had fallen. But I reminded myself that this was my path now. I had to keep moving forward to reclaim my happiness. The next phase of my journey would be challenging, but I was ready. I was prepared to face whatever consequences came my way. I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever believed, and I was excited to see where this newfound strength would take me. My life was mine to rebuild, and I was determined to create something beautiful from the ashes of my past. As the divorce proceedings began to unfold, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that was filled with both excitement and uncertainty. I had anticipated the challenges ahead, but nothing could prepare me for the emotional roller coaster that was about to ensue. I had taken the first step by hiring a competent lawyer, someone who specialized in divorce cases. I wanted to make sure I was fully protected, especially given the financial implications of our split. My lawyer, Sarah, was incredibly supportive and knowledgeable, and she helped me navigate the complexities of the process. She advised me on how to approach the situation with Lisa, emphasizing that I needed to remain calm and collected, no matter how heated things became. The initial paperwork was a flurry of emotions, signing forms that felt like they represented the end of my dream life. I had to remind myself that this was also the start of something new, something unique to me. I began focusing on my goals: financial independence, emotional healing, and eventually finding love again. That was in the cards for me. Lisa, however, was not making this process easy. She fought back hard, trying to dispute everything from our joint assets to the alimony she believed she deserved. It became clear that she was not ready to let go, and I could see how desperately she wanted to maintain her lifestyle. She attempted to manipulate the narrative, reaching out to our mutual friends and family to paint herself as the victim. "Jake is being unreasonable," she would tell people. "I was just going through a tough time. I can't believe he'd throw away our marriage like this." Hearing these whispers made my blood boil. I had to remind myself that I was not the one in the wrong. I had been betrayed, and it was her actions that had brought us to this point. I kept my head high and focused on what mattered: my mental and emotional well-being. The deeper the divorce proceedings went, the more I found myself reflecting on our life together. It was like watching a film, playing back memories in my mind. There were moments of laughter, love, and companionship, but those moments were now overshadowed by betrayal. I realized that the woman I once knew had morphed into someone I barely recognized. The fun-loving partner I had loved was replaced by a self-serving individual who would do anything to cling to her lifestyle. One evening, during a particularly tense negotiation meeting with our lawyers, Lisa made a desperate attempt to sway me. She showed up at my office unannounced and caught me off guard. I was swamped with work, but her sudden appearance threw me off balance. "Jake, can we talk?" she asked, her eyes pleading. "I understand how much I hurt you, but can't we work something out without all this animosity?" I was taken aback. It was the first time I had seen her look genuinely vulnerable. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I quickly extinguished it. "Lisa, I don't think there's anything left to say. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. Please just hear me out," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I don't want to fight. I still care about you, even if I made a terrible mistake." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. "Caring about me doesn't excuse your actions. You chose to betray my trust, and that's not something I can overlook." Her composure crumbled as she began to cry. "I never intended for things to go this far. It was just a fling. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her tears did pull at my heartstrings, but I hardened my resolve. I had seen this act before, her trying to manipulate me with emotions. "You can't fix this with tears or apologies, Lisa. Trust is not something you can buy back once it's broken." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging in the air, heavy with regret. I could see the frustration and anger on her face as it twisted into a mask of defeat. With a shaky breath, she turned to leave, but not before looking back one last time. "Just know that I never wanted to lose you," she said softly, before walking out the door. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a mix of relief and sadness wash over me. I had stood my ground, but the emotional toll was still there. I reminded myself that I had chosen this path for a reason. I couldn't allow her to manipulate me again. In the weeks that followed, the divorce proceedings became a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Lisa continued to fight for what she believed she deserved, but my lawyer kept reminding me to stay strong. We worked through the logistics, figuring out assets and debts, and every time something went in my favor, I felt a wave of empowerment. I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was embracing my independence and rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. I took up new hobbies, like hiking and photography, and I even started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual outings, but it felt good to be out there again, meeting new people. Eventually, I found myself surrounded by a supportive network of friends who encouraged me to keep moving forward. They reminded me that life was still full of opportunities, and I shouldn't let this experience define me. As the final court date approached, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. I was ready for this chapter to close so I could fully embrace my new life. I had learned a lot about myself throughout this process, about resilience, strength, and the importance of self-worth. When the day finally arrived, I walked into the courtroom feeling composed. I was ready to face the judge and put this all behind me. As I sat there, waiting for the proceedings to begin, I reflected on how far I had come. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. With my heart steady and my mind clear, I knew that whatever happened next was just another step toward my future, a future that was brighter than I had ever imagined. I was ready to close the door on my past and walk confidently into the life that awaited me. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the sterile atmosphere a stark contrast to the emotions swirling inside me. As I sat there, I took deep breaths, reminding myself of everything I had gone through. The betrayal, the anger, the heartache, all of it had brought me to this moment, and I was ready to close the door on that chapter of my life. When the judge entered, I felt a rush of adrenaline. It was finally happening. I glanced at Lisa, who was sitting across the room, her face a mask of determination, but I could see the underlying fear in her eyes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that the decisions we were making today would reshape both our futures. The proceedings began with our lawyers presenting the facts, our assets, the timeline of our marriage, and the details surrounding the divorce. Lisa's lawyer argued passionately for alimony and contested a few of my claims about her spending habits, but I remained composed. I had the evidence and I was confident in my position. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood up, my heart pounding, but I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I looked directly at the judge, then shifted my gaze to Lisa. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "this divorce is not just a legal formality for me. It's a necessary step toward reclaiming my life after the betrayal I experienced. Lisa and I built a life together, but she shattered that trust when she chose to cheat on me. I don't believe she deserves any financial support from me after her actions." I felt the weight of my words reverberate in the room. I wasn't just stating facts, I was reclaiming my narrative. I continued, "I don't wish harm upon her, but I refuse to be held responsible for her choices. I believe we should end this relationship amicably and fairly, but she must understand that her actions have consequences." The judge nodded, and I could see Lisa's expression shift from defiance to concern. I took a deep breath and sat down, feeling a surge of empowerment wash over me. I had found my voice, and I was using it to stand up for what I believed was right. After hearing both sides, the judge asked for a brief recess to consider the evidence and arguments. I could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I glanced at Lisa one more time. She was nervously tapping her foot, and I noticed her hands fidgeting in her lap. For the first time, I felt a twinge of empathy. This was undoubtedly difficult for her, but I had to remind myself that she was the architect of her own misfortune. When the judge returned, the atmosphere grew even tenser. He delivered his ruling with the kind of authority that left no room for doubt. Based on the evidence presented, I find for the petitioner. The court will grant the divorce, and I rule that there will be no alimony awarded, he said firmly. A wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The life I had shared with Lisa, the dreams we had built together, was officially done. I had taken control, and I felt a sense of liberation that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I looked over at Lisa, who sat in stunned silence, her face pale. I felt a mix of sadness and satisfaction. She would have to face the consequences of her choices alone. After the court hearing, I walked out, the sunlight hitting my face like a warm embrace. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew that the road ahead was still uncertain, but I was finally free to explore it. I had the opportunity to reinvent myself, to focus on my happiness without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. I focused on self-care, reconnecting with friends, and rediscovering passions I had put on the back burner during my marriage. I began to travel, something I had always wanted to do but had postponed for Lisa's preferences. I explored new places, tasted new cuisines, and even took up hiking, which became a source of solace for me. As for dating, I approached it cautiously. I had learned lessons about trust and vulnerability, and I was no longer willing to give my heart away blindly. I met some incredible people, each one teaching me something new about myself and what I wanted in a partner. I found joy in the little moments, the laughter shared over coffee, and the thrill of new connections. I also took time to reflect on the lessons I had learned through this experience. I realized that life is unpredictable, and sometimes it throws you the most difficult challenges, but it's how you respond to those challenges that defines you. I learned the importance of self-worth, of standing up for myself, and of never compromising my values for someone else. Months later, I received a text from Lisa. It was an apology. She finally owned up to her mistakes and expressed regret for how things had ended. I was surprised by the message, and I took a moment to respond thoughtfully. I thanked her for reaching out, but I also made it clear that I had moved on, and I wished her well in her future endeavors. I closed my phone, feeling a sense of closure. The narrative of my life had shifted, and I was no longer defined by my past. I had taken the pain and turned it into a catalyst for growth. I was excited about what lay ahead, ready to embrace the next chapter with open arms. I learned to love myself more fiercely, to appreciate the beauty in life's unpredictability. I was no longer the man who had been betrayed. I was a survivor, empowered by my choices. And that was a beautiful thing.